The World Bank has lowered its estimates for South Africa's economic growth. It says the country will only grow by 0.6% in 2017 and 1.1% in 2018, before showing gains of 2% in 2019. South Africa's economy grew by just 0.5% in 2016. South African Reserve Bank says the lower projections are due to the impact of the credit ratings downgrade. Two ratings agencies have recently lowered South Africa's sovereign rating to sub-investment grade. The World Bank has agreed, saying a deterioration of investor confidence in South Africa has impacted its economic growth. Well, South Africa's trade and investment policies have come almost full circle. Under the administrations of Presidents Nelson Mandela and Thabo Mbeki, free trade and bilateral agreements were signed with several economic blocs and developed countries. But current President Jacob Zuma, however, has taken a different approach. Angelo Coppola has more.
South Africa's trade and investment policies have moved almost full circle. The Mandela and Mbeki administrations signed free trade and bilateral agreements with several economic blocs and developed countries. The Zuma administration has taken a different tack.
But where they become much more interventionist is around safeguard duties, anti-dumping duties, things like that. Now, obviously, you do need to protect some industries to some extent, but I think the extent of the interventions of the DTI are much greater in this administration than they were previously.
But that's countered to some extent by the need to attract investment. Often investors want to be able to bring in certain products duty-free so they can manufacture and export into the region. So those two tensions play out in our trade and investment policies.
The consequences of this type of trade policy, it's argued, hit the poor the hardest because prices remain artificially high to protect a particular industry, like the chicken sector, for example.
And that's something government needs to take into account. I can understand the government's concern about employment, but you need to look at the real effect on the people who are buying chicken.
The consequence really has been that our industries are increasingly uncompetitive, they're increasingly protected. But having said that, there's a whole range of other things that they have to deal with beyond trade policy, and so you can quite understand the protectionist impacts. If one just thinks of wage rates, for instance.
While this approach will drive an inwardly focused trade and investment policy, there is the country's commitment to develop and grow intra-African trade. The free trade area continentally and an existing regional agreement are cases in point.
By being more protectionist and sort of economically nationalistic, South Africa is aligning itself more with the Trump administration in the US than it is with the EU, for example.
Turning to Africa, trade imbalances are still the order of the day.
The flip side is they don't have the capacity to export much, so it's quite difficult to boost intra-African trade anyway. I think what you have been seeing in recent decades is a lot of South African companies investing into the region, broadly defined region, and exports tend to follow.
The South African government is in a precarious position. It's got to try and meet its social obligations, and it's also got to try and grow the economy. And trying to balance those two is proving to be quite a challenge. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.